We're getting close. Oh, you can't hear me. That's a problem. Let me see what's going on there. Hmm. Microphone says, let's hit the test buttons then. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Huh. Okay, so my microphone test definitely said it was working. Check that you're on the right volume for whatever device you're using. Sometimes it might be set to the wrong speaker set. Sometimes just the volume could be turned down. But it definitely seems like it's working. Oh, and that's the other option, which is to log out and come back in. And while you're doing that, let me take care of the YouTube features. All right, that is there, and then we need that button there. All right. And as usual, I will try to keep up with any comments in YouTube, but the main conversation screen is not on the YouTube panel, so I apologize if there is a delay in getting that response. And as a reminder to people on Zoom, feel free to either unmute or to unchat. Sorry, either unmute or to enter chat if you would like to ask any questions there. So yeah, use either chat or just unmute and ask a question on Zoom, or put the question into the chat on YouTube, and either way will be fine. All right. Hopefully everyone can hear me now. And let's begin then with chapter 46. We are in Parashat Vayigash. We are right up to the end of the story of Genesis. Obviously, the story never really ends, but there is a major transition by the time we hit the book of Exodus. So here at the end of Genesis, what is going on? Well, we finally have the reconciliation between Joseph and his brothers, and the revelation that the famine is going to continue, and the decision to move the family from the land of Canaan down to the land of Egypt, presumably temporarily, although we know from having been reading this now all the way back into the early chapters of Bereshit that the people are going to eventually become strangers in a land, that they will be trapped by bondage and other such problems. A careful reader is probably getting the jitters about now, and recognizing that this may be the beginning. Indeed, Jacob himself may be getting the jitters right now as he is being invited down into the land of Egypt. And that's why chapter 46 begins with a discussion of the experience that Jacob is going to have as he's about to head down into Egypt. So at the end of 45, he agrees to go. Here in 46, we see his encounter with God. Israel traveled with all that was his and came to Beersheba, and he sacrificed sacrifices to the God of his father Yitzchak. So Beersheba, as you must remember, was a very important city for both Abraham and Isaac. And now Jacob, here introduced as Israel. You may remember as well that he was given that name by God during the nighttime wrestling, and here he is being addressed as such. He gets to Beersheba, which is near the southern tip of the area that was considered the heartland, and heading past that is really going beyond the boundaries of the nation as it had been established at that time. So he's there at Beersheba. He is making a sacrifice. He is perhaps looking for guidance. Perhaps he is looking for to display gratitude. It is a little unclear what he is looking for, but he gets a response. Verse 2. And God said to Israel in visions of the night, he said, Yaakov, Yaakov. He said, here I am. All right, so we get God's response. There is a vision happening here, and it is at night. Rambam has much to say about this in the Guide for the Perplexed, but we don't really have time to go into it. The long and short of it is that apart from Moses, this is the normal method of communication between God and other prophets. And God calls out to him, Yaakov, Yaakov. That doubling is a significant indicator of something, because it doesn't happen all the time. And Jacob says in response, Hineni. Hineni is, again, a very famous word that occurs throughout Tanakh. It is a statement of, here I am. It's a statement of readiness, of engagement. So both sides have connected on this vision, and now we get to the meat of the conversation. Now he said, meaning God, I am El, here translated as God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid of going down to Egypt, for a great nation will I make of you there. Now you may notice that God is aware that Jacob is probably afraid of going down into Egypt, and with good cause, as we'll know from history, but also with good cause, as he would have learned from his grandfather Abraham, of the idea that eventually his descendants, perhaps Jacob included, would become slaves in another land. So he is obviously worried, but the famine is forcing his hand, and God is telling him, don't worry. Not only will you go, but you will become a great nation there. And I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I myself will bring you up, yes, up again. And Yosef will lay his hand on your eyes. Okay, so we get this intense usage of the word anochi, and if you look in a generic dictionary, that'll simply be defined as I, as a slightly more formal version of the ani version of that pronoun. However, because of the way Hebrew grammar works, anochi, the word I, is not actually needed as a separate pronoun in each of these clauses. That is to say, just saying ered would have made it clear that I will go down. That's all built into those three simple letters. By spelling out the anochi with each of these clauses, God is emphasizing that it is indeed God's self, that will be involved in this action, not an intermediary, not something else, but God's self. This is an intensifier to really drive home the level of commitment that is being promised here. And it is also, of course, theologically very significant, because in the early days of humanity's polytheism, many of the pagan nations believed that their gods were kind of localized, meaning that the god of one land may have no power in the land next door, and that their power ended at the border. Here, God is saying, look, I am not like the images of the pagan gods and idols, where you sort of run out of steam at the border, or if you don't have an idol, I'm the one that made the whole universe. I have just as much authority in Egypt as I do in Canaan or anywhere else. That is sort of the beginning of the notion of transcendence that God is trying to help the world come to understand, and to unlocalize the idea of the divine, so that it isn't so narrowly construed by so many of the ancient people. So God makes that promise, and finishes it off by saying that Joseph will lay his hand on your eyes. This is the euphemism for Joseph will be the one that will bury you, meaning that not only will you be reunited with Joseph, but you will stay with him until the end. And then when you finally depart, Joseph will be there to participate in the funeral service. So, oh, where's my mouse? There we are. Yaakov departed from Beersheba. Israel's son carried Yaakov, their father, their little ones, and their wives in the wagons that Pharaoh had sent for carrying him. And they took their required livestock and their property that they had gained in the land of Canaan, and came to Egypt, Yaakov and all his seed with him. His son and his daughter, his son and the sons of his sons with him, his daughters and the daughters of his sons, all his seed he brought with him. So a couple things before we get into the intro of the next line. One, this is verse 7, a strong reminder that, as our rabbis teach us, that although only one daughter was mentioned, Dinah, that doesn't mean that there were not other daughters. It could be that this is referring to the daughters-in-law. It could be referring to the other unnamed daughters of Jacob. There is a general tendency in the Torah to only name people that are significant to the story of the text at that moment. That doesn't mean that we don't care about the other people. It's just, well, the Torah doesn't give us a listing of everybody's name that lived at any given time. It doesn't give us a list of their life events for everyone alive at a time. The book would be a little bit longer if it were doing so. So it's a good reminder that just because something is happening off screen doesn't mean it didn't happen. It just means that that wasn't the focus of the text at that point. So now we see Yaakov going down, but is it Yaakov going down or is it Israel going down? We see that highlighted here in verse 5, Yaakov. Sorry about that. My connection seemed to have dropped for a second. Hopefully you can still hear me, and hopefully the recording is still working. Just make sure that the live stream looks like it's working. I think so. Okay. Let's go ahead and jump back in. Okay, that's always disconcerting when the connection drops like that. My screen is not being shared anymore. Okay, hold on a second. Yes, let's just throw me completely off stride. And that's back up and spotlight so that it stays there. Okay. Woof. Okay, 13 minutes in and we're already hitting technical problems. Well, it is what it is. As I was saying, either before or during the technical interruption, Bnei Yisrael, the sons of Israel, the children of Israel, becomes the term used for all of the people ever since, meaning that even today, I am considered part of Bnei Yisrael, and so is any Jewish person around the world. The term Yisrael as the general category for the people that come as descendants from Jacob is the standard word. We don't usually say Bnei Yaakov anymore, unless we are talking specifically about the 12 sons that were had immediately during that generation. And that means we have to scratch our heads, because although in the modern term it seems to have become very clear, Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, is referring to all Jewish people. Bnei Yaakov is referring to the original 12 sons. That does not seem at all clear here in the text. That here in the text, as we noticed, sometimes Yaakov is being referred to as Yaakov, Jacob, and sometimes he is being referred to as Israel, as Israel. And it can happen in the same verse, as we saw here in verse 5, where he is first addressed as Yaakov by the narrator, and then as Israel, and then by Yaakov and Yaakov again, and also back in our second verse of the chapter. And God said to Israel in the visions of the night, and he said, Yaakov, Yaakov. So if God is addressing Israel, why does he call out Yaakov? It seems to be very inconsistent, very differently than you might remember from the changing of the name for Avram into Avraham. Once that transition happened, it felt much more permanent. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. But before we get into the full name change, I want to just spend a little time looking at our doubling up of Yaakov, Yaakov. Does anyone have any questions before we jump into our commentary? Okay, then let's go ahead and jump into the commentary. All right. The reason this call to Yaakov is repeated, Yaakov, Yaakov, is to illustrate that for how many years Yaakov had not been favored with a communication from God. By repeating his name at this point, Yaakov was alerted to the fact that he would receive a prophetic insight. So Radak starts off with a very straightforward, practical reason for the doubling up here. Like I said, doubling up isn't rare, and we'll see a lot more examples in just a minute. But Radak wants to take this as being special by itself. And he says, well, we have to remember, at this point in Yaakov's life, he had not had a communication from God for quite some time. How do we know this? Well, because if he had been in communion with God, then he surely would have known that Joseph was still alive, and he wouldn't have been disbelieving when the brothers came back with the message that Joseph was in Egypt and the vizier and all of those other things. So that means that Yaakov must have been no longer communicating with God the way he had, not having prophetic visions. As such, argues Radak, God needs to get his attention and needs to sort of shake him from that disconnected point of view and pull him back into the connection. And by doubling up the word Yaakov, it's the equivalent of shouting somebody's name twice. The first one they might have ignored, the second one they're going to hear. Now you have their attention, and the communication can truly begin. So, very practical, very straightforward. However, Rashi gives a more general understanding of the doubling. The repetition of the name is a mark of affection. And indeed, he's basing this off the Midrash in Sifra. So let's go ahead and look at the longer version. Moshe, Moshe, Avraham, Avraham, Yaakov, Yaakov, Shmuel, Shmuel. These are all examples of God calling out to somebody in a doubling of the name, an expression of affection and of prompting to zeal. So there are two things mentioned in Sifra, although Rashi only brings one of them. The first is, as Rashi mentioned, that the doubling of a name is a sign of love. That in the literary style of the Torah, when somebody is addressed by their name being doubled, it is an endearing statement. It is not meant to be alarming. It is not meant to be a rebuke. It is not necessarily even meant to get their attention in the way Radak seems to be indicating. It is in order that the person as well as the reader knows that God has great affection for this person. And it is also there to prompt zeal, meaning that it is hoping to encourage a strong, passionate response and readiness to do what God is asking us to do. And indeed, that is in fact why we get the Hineni response. Hineni is the statement of zeal by the listener, that when someone calls out your name and you say Hineni, you are saying not what or what do you want, but you are saying, I'm ready. I hear you calling me and I am responding with 100% openness to whatever you need. And that sort of encapsulate what Jacob's position is here. God is still showing love, and Jacob is still showing his readiness. There is no recrimination. There is no bitterness of, well, God, why didn't you tell me my son was still alive? Why did you let me suffer? Instead, it's, wait, God's talking to me? Then I am back ready for action, whatever God needs. There is another connotation, specifically here from the Sifra talking about the book of Leviticus, that the Moshe phrase is, he is Moshe before being spoken to, and he is the same righteous Moshe after being spoken to. It is a statement here that Moses especially exemplifies this notion that by having the name doubled, we are reminded that Moshe was a truly exceptional person that was already of such a great height that even after the speaking to him of God, he remains in that same position. And as such, that nature of Moses is attested to as being truly exceptional. Okay, but like I said, our main topic is the name change and what's going on there, because names matter in Tanakh. I know they sort of matter in English too, but most people, when they're naming a child in English, or even if they choose their own name, are not usually giving deep consideration to it, and certainly it's not usually happening by prophetic insight. In Tanakh, on the other hand, names are usually expressions either directly of the parent or the parent influenced by God, or seemingly just by God, even if the parents didn't understand, that there is something special happening here. And a name change by God is even more powerful when the name has been changed at a later point in someone's life, specifically because of their encounter with the divine, then all the more so we take notice. So, this difference between Yaakov and Israel, between Jacob and Israel, should be getting our attention, and the fact that it is being used inconsistently should be getting our attention even more so. So, even though Tanakh calls Avraham Avram later, meaning that actually sometimes Avraham does get called Avram later, but we got to go all the way to the book of Nehemiah and First Chronicles to find it. It is in his praise and not in his shame, meaning that reverting to the earlier name is there to praise him for his arc of history. It is not there to condemn him, to hint at his problems. Also, to Yoshua, to Hosea, right? Being called Hoshea again, because his name does get abridged a second time in the book of Deuteronomy. Again, it is in his praise and not in his shame. He is the same Avram before God spoke to him, and he is the same Avram after God spoke to him. He is the same Hoshea before he became great. He is the same Hoshea after he became. Moshe, Moshe, Avraham, Avraham, Yaakov, Yaakov, right? All of that is very similar expressions of love and encouragement, as we have seen. Great, no problem. They are the same people before God spoke to them, and they are the same people after God spoke to them. They are the same people before they became great, and they are the same people after they became great. So Tosefta is giving us an expansion on this idea from Sifra that this name can sometimes crop up again, but really what we should recognize is that the doubling of names and even name changes, even if they get used later on, is not meant to be an insult. That both are there as a statement for praise. That the reversion of the name later on can sometimes be used just as a retelling in order to show the greatness of the person, and the doubling of the name can be used as a sign not only of affection and zeal, but also as a way of reminding us that the person had to be great in the first place before God would reach out, and that the person remained great after their encounter with the divine. Okay, pretty straightforward, I hope. If not, then I apologize, but the clock is ticking, so we need to keep moving. What he said to him at this time was due to Yaakov having become Yisrael. He would have to display qualities of leadership, as his sons would have to deal with people who would challenge them. So Sforno is trying to tell us that this verse 2 is God said to Yisrael, Yaakov, Yaakov, that God is addressing Jacob as Israel, even though he's using the name Jacob in the actual auditory experience that Jacob is experiencing, meaning that it is addressed to the essence of this man, which is Yisrael, more than the essence of the man, which is Yaakov. Because the essence of the man, Yisrael, is the essence of one that struggles, one that has leadership, one that overcomes challenges. Indeed, that's what the name Yisrael means, the one who struggles, who strives with what is divine. So Sforno was arguing that the introduction of this phrase of verse 2 by the term Yisrael is there to remind us and to remind him that he is going to have to be strong, just as he was when he earned that name. Now, great explanation, but if you're like me, you are still left wondering, well, then why not only call him Yisrael? Why introduce the conversation with the term Yisrael and then revert to the name Yaakov during the discussion? That seems a little, well, just inconsistent. And any inconsistencies in Torah must have a purpose. Let's see if we can't understand that. So, after God had told him, your name shall not be called anymore Jacob, but Israel shall be your name, back in the wrestling with the angel scene, it would be proper that he called him by this glorious name. And so he is indeed mentioned 3 times in this section. As we saw, the name Yisrael shows up multiple times here alongside Jacob. However, he called him Jacob, right? So why would he call him Jacob if it's even better to call him by the name Yisrael. Well, he called him Jacob in order to hint that now he will not contend with God and men and prevail, but he will be in a house of bondage until he will also bring him up again, since the exile now begins with him. It's rough. Basically, what this is saying is that the usage of the word Jacob here in particular is to remind Jacob that right now, that God wrestler that you were, that prevailing over the divine and over people, well, that's not going to be happening. You're about to lose. You're about to go down in the colloquial American English sense of you're about to suffer a defeat. Maybe not Jacob himself. Indeed, Jacob will be buried back in the Machpelah, and he will be given full honors. But his descendants are about to enter the spiral that will lead to the enslavement. That is not a time of Israel. That is not a time of the thriving strength of the one that overcomes man and God. And as such, Yaakov is also there. The Yaakovness of him is also there. As Ramban explains, this is the meaning of the verse. These are the names of the children of Israel who came into Egypt, Jacob and his sons. For they would come there with the appellation children of Israel, since the children would multiply and increase there, and their name and glory would extend. However, he is Jacob when descending there. That it is not as simple as to say that once they had reached the level of being Israel, that their strength and their perseverance and their ascendancy would be guaranteed. They were still going to have moments of defeat, and that is reflected by the term Jacob. So that is Ramban's, Nachmanides, as he's often referred to, explanation of this back and forth between the two. Now, as we scroll down here, Tur HaAruch is going to review this in more detail and indeed refer back to Ramban. So don't jettison that idea too fast. Even though God had told him, Jacob, that in the future he would no longer be called Yaakov but Israel, this change of name was not the same as that of Avram's name being changed to Avraham. Avraham had undergone a name change in honor of changing his religion, becoming circumcised, and simultaneously becoming Jewish. Right? I mean, that was kind of the watershed moment for Avram becoming Avraham. It was a lot happening all at once. This was not the case with Yaakov, who had been born Jewish. So Yaakov was already part of a family that was committed to the monotheism of Adonai, and as such, he was born and circumcised in 8 days, and he was raised with that idea. When his name gets changed, he's not changing his religion. He is not getting circumcised. He's not entering the Jewish faith. It's a very different circumstance than that of Abraham. While it would have been inappropriate to continue to refer to Avraham by his former name, in fact, it would have been insulting. This consideration did not apply to the name Yaakov, right? The name Avram was the name given to him by his idolatrous family. It was the name that he had worn until he finally reached this threshold of entering into the higher level of the covenant with God, as symbolized by the changing truly of his religion, his circumcision, and the name. So it would be insulting to go back to the earlier name. With Yaakov, it's not the same stigma. Furthermore, if Israel had never again been called Yaakov, people would have thought that the stigma attached to the name Yaakov, that is to say, crooked one, had been justified at the time he had been known as such. If you junk the old name Jacob, then people could say, he's just taking on a new alias because everybody knows he truly is crooked, just like his name says. That's why he's changing his name. He's trying to hide his past. He's trying to make people forget about his crooked behavior. He doesn't want people to call him Jacob anymore because that's just a reminder of how corrupt he had been. But if he goes on being called Jacob, and indeed if God even uses the term, then the name Jacob itself doesn't have that stigma, because if he wears it comfortably, proudly, then it is a way of diffusing the slurs that might have been hurled against him. Something similar happens in some cultures that will try to reclaim names or slurs that were used against them, either racial, sexual, religious, and try to reclaim them. Now, this is not always successful, nor, in my opinion, is it always advisable. Certainly, the names that others have chosen for a group intending to be derogatory, generally speaking, it's best not to reclaim them. But a name the group had for itself that had become a byword for something bad, if there is a possibility to reclaim it as their own, then that's, I think, a worthwhile endeavor. The case under example right here would be the name Jew. For many, many decades, at least, the term Jew has often been considered an insult and has been used deliberately as an insult by many non-Jews. And as such, there are many Jewish people that are uncomfortable saying, I am a Jew. You will often hear them refer to themselves as, I am a Jewish person, I am Jewish, I come from a Jewish background. Very rarely will you hear, at least among some people, I am a Jew or the Jews. Unfortunately, the people who refer to the Jews the most tend to be anti-Semites. Among some of us Jews, there is a concerted effort to reintroduce that word as a perfectly normal and indeed proud word for describing us. Because in English, that is the most normal, logical, and natural word for a Jewish person. And it should not be a word that has been wholly taken over by those that use it as as hate speech. So as you go through life, try to look for good ways to use that word and try to keep your eye on those that are using it as an insult. But getting back to Ramban writes that the reason the Torah reverted to calling him Yaakov at this stage was to hint that once in Egypt, his task would no longer be to contend with the heavenly representatives of the spiritually negative forces, such as the angel representing Esau in heaven. Indeed, this was a more Kabbalistic view that Torah Aruch is referring to here, that he had a job, and that was to wrestle with the divine, and that's not going to be what's so important. From now on, he would be basically in the house of slavery, as effective from now the years of exile God had predicted that the covenant of the pieces to Abraham had begun. This condition would continue until God would redeem the Jewish people from there and lead them to the Holy Land. If, nonetheless, the Torah in verse 5 begins to list the names of Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, and not, as we might have expected, the children of Yaakov, even though it was these who traveled to their exile, meaning we might have thought that we would go back to full-time usage of the word Yaakov since they are beginning the exile, but it doesn't. Why not? It was to assure them that paradoxically, the Jewish people's developing into a numerically strong nation was a process that would take place in the very land where they would be cruelly suppressed and tormented. And indeed, that is a paradox, and it is one that has played out in different ways at different points in our history, that we may be Bnei Yaakov, the children of Jacob, when we are no longer on a level of contesting for the greatest amount of freedom and self-direction, when we are in chains, when we are oppressed in ghettos at other points in our earthly oppression. But we do still seem to have the ability to not only survive, but in many of those cases, to find at least some aspects of our lives to celebrate and create greatness from. So under the brutal oppression of the Romans, rabbinic literature flourished. Under the crushing pressures of the Middle Ages, we were able to develop great poetry, literature, Torah and Talmud commentaries, and other just masterpieces. So, and here, even just numerically, we were able to overcome this situation, which would have reduced most other nations. Instead, we actually become a greater nation numerically in Egypt than we were when we went down. Those 70 people that enter become thousands upon thousands, myriads and myriads. So that is a paradox, and one that is being reflected by this duality of the name. Jacob for the earthly bondage that we enter, but Yisrael for the spiritual flourishing and the ability to overcome that, even in material ways as well. And that is something that we would have missed if the name had not been subtly varied between these verses. If God had just referred to him as Jacob or just referred to him as Israel, we would have lost that insight. Again, it is these fine elements of how the Torah was authored that we lean upon to tease out additional insights that would have been missed if it had been a simpler or more straightforward text. And as we see in our conclusion here from Tanhuma, from the Midrash, and Moses went and returned to Jethro, his father-in-law. Prior to this, it is written, and when the Lord saw that he returned to see, and he said, Moses, Moses, the incident of the burning bush, if you're not aware. Rav Ava, the son of Kahana, said, everyone whose name is repeated in immediate succession experiences life in both worlds. Noah, Noah, Abraham, Abraham, Jacob, Jacob, Moses, Moses, Samuel, Samuel, Perez, Perez. All right, we get this doubling of names in many, many places. And that is an indication here, says Rav Ava, that the person whose name is repeated as such will have life here, ba'olam hazeh, and life also, ba'olam haba, in the world to come, meaning that a share in what usually gets translated as heaven. So it's a way of explicitly saying this person is going to make it. They are going to be okay. However, someone retorted, because you're allowed to argue with the rabbi, is it not also written, these are the generations of Terach, right? Genesis 11, Abraham's father, whose name is Terach, he gets doubled up. Now, what's happening there, and this is why it's a smart aleck question, is it's not saying Terach in quick succession like Yaakov, Yaakov. It is the fact that the sentence is being broken up at that point. And so it's like saying, these are the generations of Terach. Terach was blah, blah, blah. It's a new clause. And as such, it doesn't quite fit the same pattern as like Moses. So what do we do though? Because if the name is doubled up, then the name is doubled up. And that means, life in the world to come for Terach, right? Now, why would that be surprising? I mean, after all, it's Abraham's father. Well, because Terach is considered to be an idolater. Certainly in the Midrashic understanding of Terach, he is considered to be an actual maker and seller of idols. This is not the kind of person that we would generally hold up as being a symbol of righteousness to such a degree that his place in the world to come would be guaranteed. So, how does Rav Ava reply to this? Even he, Terach, had a portion in both worlds, for our patriarch Abraham was not buried until he was assured that his father, Terach, had repented. For it is said, but you shall go to your fathers in peace. Right? How can Abraham be said to go to his fathers in peace if he's not sure that his fathers are also in peace? Abraham said to the Holy One, blessed be he, Master of the universe, shall I go to my fathers, though I have stored up good deeds in this world? Right? Abraham is believing that his ancestors are not in a good place. And so saying you're going to go to your fathers is kind of a threat. It's kind of a letdown if we were to read that from Abraham's point of view. I mean, after all, his father wasn't such a great guy. So saying you're going to get the same reward your father got to someone like Abraham is basically like saying, despite the fact that you've been so righteous and good, you're going to end up just as bad off as he is. And that's not a real nice thing to say. And thus, the response becomes, the Holy One, blessed be he, answered, be assured, your father has repented. Hence, his Terach's name was repeated. What this means is that sometime after Abraham had left Terach behind, because remember, Terach was up in Haran when Avraham came down to the south. At some point, Terach did teshuvah. Terach recognized the wrongness of what he had done. He recognized the foolishness of idolatry. As such, he is receiving the proper reward of the righteous of any nation. And when Abraham passes from this world, he will indeed receive a reward similar to his father's, because his father also has earned that just reward by having actually changed, even if it took him a little longer than Abraham would have liked. So this final doubling up here is to remind us that change is absolutely possible, and that even those that were terrible in the past can find their way back to the right course, and they can make their way not only in this world, but into Olam Haba, into the world to come as well. And with that, I'm going to throw it open to see if there are any other questions or comments. And I'm not hearing anyone. So I think we're going to go ahead and call it that for today. Well, thank you all so much for joining me, as always. I think I was speaking a little fast because I was nervous about the streaming and hoping that it would hold. But that just means you get a little extra time this afternoon to go back and read the full parasha. A reminder, you can always find much more commentary on Sefaria. Remember, you just click a verse, and all of the information that can be found throughout our tradition, at least it's been cataloged on Sefaria so far, is available on a click to the right. And anything that has the phrase EN next to it, there at least is some of those sources that will be in English as well. Take care, everyone, and be well.